Welcome to this video. We're going to be covering Redux, and the reason why I wanted to make a video on Redux is because I have seen a lot of videos that explain how Redux works, and I'm not really sure it explained really well or it's like helping people out, but I feel like I need to address this part of it and make sure there's like a nice explanation on why you should be using Redux and how it works and what it takes to actually master Redux. I think that's what's missing in most of the videos. Like they just show you what Redux is in your face and that's it. But it takes a little while to actually understand Redux, and sometimes you get it really quick, sometimes you need a little bit of practice, and this is why I'm here and making this tutorial. So if you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe, you like, you comment down below what you want to see in the future. I have a lot of things planned, so I really need support from you guys. So make sure you subscribe and like and share the channel with your friends. But without further ado, let's get started. So what is Redux? Redux is a predictable state container for JS app. I mean, that's they pretty much explained it over here. It's predictable, very consistent, centralized. You know, you have like a very centralized place where you can distribute the states. It's debuggable. They have their own tool that you can use to debug, and it's very flexible. It's really help when you're building a large ecosystem, you know, like a large app, and really fits in really well. So why you want to use Redux is sometime when you have a React app, you pass down props to a children, and then children have other children that you pass it down. So it's kind of like create a really crazy prop drilling chaining effect. So you don't want that. Sometimes you want the state to be available on other component, and in that case you need a centralized place where you have state. You can just create a component, any component, you don't need to attach to anywhere, and just grab the state from the centralized place. So that's where kind of Redux comes in. And yeah, so I'm just gonna go over here. They have like a really nice diagram. I'm just gonna give you a brief overview of that, and then we're gonna start coding it, because it's not gonna make any sense when you see the diagram, because it's a little complex. I would say when you start, it can be a little bit of like a hassle to get the boilerplate down, but I want to make sure you understand everything you need. So what is Redux? Is a pattern library for managing and updating application state using event called actions. So there's like three main part in Redux. We don't need to know anything in here. I'm just gonna go straight to the diagram. So this is like a nice diagram here. Action, state, view. View is the UI, front end, and action. Action is pretty important. So anytime you wanna update the state, you need to do some action. So I wanna give you a brief overview of what this is doing over here. It's like gives you a really nice data flow visually. And here what it's doing. So you have a UI, you click on this deposit button or withdraw button, it creates an action. The action kind of taking the payload and the type. So payload have the value. If you have $10, it will have the value of $10, and then it's gonna distribute to the reducer. Once the action goes into the reducer know exactly what to do, and then it's going to update the state. This is the state where everything lives. So you can have other component that grab the state from here and have the updated data. So you want to make sure you have the state, the reducer, and the action. And dispatch is what you're gonna be using on the UI side to kind of dispatch an action. You can also use selector. This might not make sense at all at the time, but trust me, you will have a better idea once you start coding. So let's jump into the coding editor. Right here I have it. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create an app, npx create react app, and I'll create in this directory. So once you have that installed, you're gonna do npm start to start the server. And here we have the React app, right? So just a regular React app. And what we're going to do, we're going to create an example to have Redux in here. So one thing you need to do is install the React Redux packages. So you do npm install Redux. That's one of the packages. just like the standalone Redux. The other one is React Redux. Now, for a lot of people will be thinking like what we are doing over here, like there's actually a couple of updates that I want to go over. So Redux kind of like came up with a tool called Redux Toolkit, which makes Redux implementation a lot easier, less boilerplate, and very easy to get started. But I am not going to cover the Redux Toolkit in this video because I feel like in order to truly understand Redux, you need to know how it was, how people were doing it before Redux Toolkit came in. If you understand the main technology behind Redux and React Redux, you will be able to easily grasp Redux Toolkit. So this, for the Redux Toolkit, I'm going to make a separate video after this, and then we're going to be covering Redux Toolkit on that one. But for now, we're going to be doing straight up the old-fashioned way. I mean, a lot of people still use it this way. I think like Redux Toolkit is pretty new, so I've seen it, but I've also seen people using the same old technique as well. But in order to really understand it, I think you need to know this. So we're going to be using Redux, React Redux, and Redux, not the toolkit. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a folder called store on the SSC. And inside the store, we're going to have a couple of folders. The first one being action. This is a function that kind of like takes in what kind of action you want the reducer to handle. The other one is reducer, which is really important. And the third file is store. Now, this is a boilerplate, so you might be thinking why I'm creating this. There's a lot of file in here. We gotta write a little bit of code inside as well. But this is the boilerplate. Like once you know like this tree, you will know exactly how Redux works. So my plan of making you guys really master the topic of Redux is you need to be memorizing this stuff. Like you need to know why you will be creating these 3-4 files, and then why you need to be implementing it this way. So that way you have an understanding. So first thing, you create these 3 files: action, reducer, and store. Once you have that done, we are gonna be to reducer. That's where the first main thing happens. Like remember the diagram here. You see reducer is where everything is happening. When you dispatch an action, it goes to the reducer. So this is a store we created so far. And in the store, the action, reducer, and the state is here. And yeah, so we have everything in here. So we have the store file in here. So inside the store, we have reducer, we have the action too that lives inside the store, but it can flow around. We're gonna grab that action to our UI as well, since we are going to be exporting from here, and the state. So we are right here. We are creating this. All right. So let's start with the reducer, because that's the main piece. That's going to be updating the state, and it's also going to be taking in any kind of action. So here's the reducer. Let's jump right in here. Here's the reducer. So first thing first, you're going to create a const variable called initial state. And in the state, we're going to be creating some kind of a counter. So I'm going to name the state count to 0. You can name it anything you want. This is just a variable that kind of like stay in the state. So this is an initial state. I'll show you why we created this in a second. So next we're gonna do export const a reducer. This is the reducer. So you can name anything you want. In this example, I will name it count reducer, and then equal a function, and then there you go. And this takes in 2 parameter always. It always takes 2 parameter. The reducer. First is the state, and the second is an action. So you remember, this is what the reducer looks like by itself. You have a count reducer. You can name it anything you want. You can call it a bank reducer. You can call it user reducer if we're updating user. So in this example, I've created count reducer, and it takes in 2 parameter, state and action always. So you have a state and you have an action. So state, I will do equal to initial state. That's why I created this initial state. That means we have a state which is equal to 0. And this is what we're going to have. By default, the state is going to have a count of 0. So this is why I created this and put it in here. So now what I'm going to do is use kind of a switch statement. Like switch, I think it makes handling reducer a lot easier. So here I have action.type and right here. So action going to have two things, type and payload. So let's go back to the diagram again. You see here there's going to be an action. And we have two things, type and payload, right? The action have two things. And right here we're going to be working with type. So first thing we need to know is what kind of action are we dealing with. If we, like for this example, they have a deposit. So deposit $10, the $10 will be added to the state. In here, we're going to be dealing with maybe add 10, for example. We can name it, we can name anything we want. But in here, I will do add 10. That means we're going to be adding number 10 to our state, to our counter. And then colon, and I will do return. And in here, this is how it's going to work. It's going to look for the action. If the action is at 10, we're going to be returning the state. So we're going to be returning the original state. And then we're going to override the count. So count is going to be state. Remember, this is the state. So we're going to be state.count plus 10, right? So we have that in place. Now I have some ESLint error because I don't have a default in here. By default, I'm just going to return state. That's it. If we don't have this kind of action type, we're just going to return state. So that's the first thing, right? So we have an action type. We're looking for an action type on the reducer, and then we're returning based on the action type. So if it's at 10, we're going to be adding 10 to our count state. So that's the reducer. So reducer, basically, again, to recap, you have a state and action. It's basically look for an action. If the action is at 10, it's going to return the updated state with the added 10 to the counter. So that's look good. Now we're going to go back to action, and we're going to be creating action over here. So action is basically a function that have those two things, you know, type and payload. So in here, I'm going to do is export const add. Let's call our action add. You can call again anything you want. So here, this is a regular function, and it's going to return two things, type add 10. So this needs to be exactly what you have on the reducer. It's looking for an add 10, and this action is create an add 10. So this action basically add and like it's kind of implement this over here. It kind of comes in and kind of invoke this right here. So we need to have the same type. So add 10, and then payload. I actually don't need any payload at the moment, so I'm just gonna write 0 over here because the 10 has been added over here. We can customize this later on, of course, which I'm gonna show you as well, how the payload changes. So right now we have two things. We have reducer and we have the action. So type and payload. So we have action in here. Remember, this is a boilerplate code. So once you understand this, once you have a grasp of this, you will understand Redux. You don't have any problem understanding Redux. It will be really easy to you. So again, reducer, kind of look for an action and then return the state. All right, cool. And action is basically return. It's a function that returns the type and payload. So I have a type of add 10 and payload of 0. Add 10 is going to be making these changes. So we have this reducer and action. Next we need to do is create a store. Now we haven't used any of the packages yet, the React Redux and the Redux. So right now we're going to be creating a store. So we need to use the package. First I'm going to do is import combine reducer from Redux and create store, right? Now this one's going to say is been deprecated, or deprecated right here, because Redux wants you to use Redux Toolkit. I will definitely cover that in a separate video, but right now I want to make sure how we used to do Redux before the Redux Toolkit, so we have a better understanding of Redux. So even it will say it's deprecated, we're going to be using that. It's still usable, so that's there. And then what we are going to be doing, we're going to be importing the reducer over here. So count reducer, let's import that right here. Right here we have it. So from the reducer file, we're importing the count reducer, and we are importing combine reducer and create store from Redux. Let's start making the root reducer. So reducer, root reducer, and combine reducer, we have this, and we do count reducer. Now this is basically ES6 syntax, is basically this. Since they're both the same thing, I'm going to do this. I have the count reducer. So the root reducer is basically combining two reducer, couple of reducer together. So we can have more reducer here. We can have a bank reducer, we can have a deposit reducer, whatever you call it, user reducer if you want to change user. So you can have a lot of reducer down here. But right now we only have one reducer, so I'm gonna have it one, and we're combining the reducers. So yeah, so root reducer is here, combine reducer, we bought it from Redux, and then we're going to be creating the store. So this is the store creation, and here what we're doing is create store is root reducer. So we use the combine reducer, we pass in the count reducer in here, the reducer that we made over here, and then whatever is the root reducer, we pass it into the create store. So we have a store. So a little bit of boilerplate. I know it can be a little of challenging to understand why we're doing all this. It's just the boilerplate code that we have to go by the rule when using Redux. But I want you to really know, like, this is you have to do this a little bit, but it makes things a lot easier. You have a separate store for this. And if you think this is not fun, I would say to go through this video and then try to implement this same thing on your own. Like you need to practice this to actually have a grasp understanding of Redux. So once we have the store, export default store, and there we have it, right? We have the diagram in here. We have the store, we have the reducer, we have the state, we have the action. So we have everything in here. All we need to do right now is basically use the dispatch. That's it. We just need to use the dispatch and we can make changes in here. So to recap, store is being created over here. Reducer, we created our reducer over here with a state. And then we have action, which is a function that return type and payload only. You remember that, you're good to go. You're almost done, like making the Redux happen. So next, all you need to do is connect the Redux store to our React application. So in order to do that, you need to go to the root of your React project, which is the index.js. Now in here, we're going to be bringing in, this is the first time where we're going to be using React Redux, because React and Redux, we're combining these two. Before that, we only use Redux package to kind of create the Redux. And once we have that, we're just now going to be connecting this. So here we're going to be bringing in provider. So provider from React Redux. There you go. So provider is going to be in the root. So very top. So parent of the root.render on React. So here I'm going to bring in the provider. That's the most parent element on our application right now. And I think it's going to be showing error. So we have an error, right? Awesome. That means it's working pretty good. So Why that have an error? Because on the provider, they need a store. So you remember we create a store. This is how it connect to React. So you have the store, you bring it in. Right now, you have no relationship with React app. It's just the store is right there. It's doing nothing. So what we're gonna be doing here is we have a prop here, store, and we're gonna be bringing in the store in here, right? So once you have that, you're all good. I'm going to be importing the store from our application. So we have a store, and I'm going to do store right here, and we have it imported. So you remember this? This is how you connect the Redux to our React app. It's like you bring in the provider from React Redux, and then you pass in the store. So the provider have a store prop, and you pass in the store that you created from your store file structure, right? So we have the Redux working. Now let's see if it shows an error. It doesn't show an error. That means we have it all working perfect. Now let's start to interact with this store. So go back to the diagram. We have this in place. Now all we need to do is we need to create some kind of event handler that's kind of dispatch this, and we're gonna have this in action. We also need some kind of a UI that we have the store, so we can detect any kind of change. So when we dispatch the action, the store is going to change to 0 to 10, right? So let's do that. It's just the UI that we need to handle. And in order to do that, let's come over to our app.js, get rid of everything in here. And I'm not going to be doing any kind of styling. It's just for the Redux tutorial. So make sure you have just simple base stuff in here that we need to make it work. So I'll create a h1, let's say count, and I'll create a h2. Here we're going to have the count data, like the stored data. So remember we have a reducer and we have this count. So we need to extract the state and display it in here, the count data. So how you do that? So in React Redux, they have a couple of hooks. One of them is use dispatch, and the other one is use selector. That's all coming from React Redux. So again, let's go back to the diagram one more time, and you have the dispatch right here. So this is basically use dispatch. So first thing I'm gonna do is very simple, okay? We're gonna do is use selector. What that is doing is it's basically going to the store, and then let's go back to the diagram, going to the store and just grabbing the state. That's it. Because you need the state to display, like put it on the UI. So you need to have the state to have some kind of representation on the UI. So we need the count, whatever is on the state, we need this variable to be on our application right here, right? So for that purpose, we're gonna use selector, and here I'm gonna do is const count data, right, is equal to use selector. Now we're gonna use this, and then we're gonna do a state. It takes in a parameter, and then it return state dot count reducer dot count. So we are going into our state, then we are going into our reducer, and then we're grabbing the state from the reducer. So remember that. So when it goes, when we need to pick all the data from our state, all we do is go to the state, then we have the count reducer, we named it count reducer, and then we go to the count reducer state count. So we go here. So the use selector kind of picks the data from your state and kind of putting it in this variable. So let's see what it says. We kind of like GSX to display a variable here. So it says 0. That means it's working, right? So we have it all working, ready to go. Again, I want to explain as much as I can because I want to make sure you guys understand. There's two things you're bringing it in from React Redux. We use dispatch, use selector. You're also bringing in the provider to connect the store. So everything that React Redux does is basically connect your state, your store, to the UI of your application. In this case, we are using React. You can also use this to with other framework as well, but we are not going to be talking about that. We are doing React only. So this is what's doing. Use selector kind of just selecting the state in your store and just displaying whatever state there is. Now, we are going to be using the dispatch right now. So what that does, one more time, you have a handler. When you click on it, when you click on the button, it kind of dispatch an action to the reducer, and it makes some changes to the state, and the state kind of update the UI, right? Because we have the use selector, it's automatically going to grab the latest state changes. So we don't need to worry about that. Redux does that under the hood. In here, we're going to be calling a function called dispatch. Count dispatch is equal to use dispatch, and we're going to call that use dispatch over here. Oops, const here. And we have dispatch waiting here, trying to do something like make some action. So we're going to be creating a button. So let's create a button to handle the some kind of event handle. And let's name it add 10. Remember, we have a reducer that add 10 plus 10 to it. So we're going to be doing exactly that. We're going to be calling this. So again, in here, what I'm going to do, on click, button have on click. And once it's clicked, we are going to be dispatching an action, right? Dispatch add, and that's it. Now where that add comes from, remember, it's coming from action. So we have an action that only return two things, type and payload. We are not playing with the payload, but in shortly I'm going to show you like how that works. But for now, we are just bringing in the action right here. So let's import our action. Store action, right? So before we click anything on here, I want to show you again, we have an event handler in place, we have the dispatch in place, and it's going to create an action because we bought that add action in here, and the dispatch parameter takes in that action. And what does that action does? It's basically return this. Once that return, the reducer will see, oh, you're trying to make an action on add 10. All right, I'll invoke this. I'll make some changes that you wanted over here. What kind of changes we wanted over here? We wanted to increase the count by add 10. Let's see in action. All right, we have it. Once I click it, it changes to 10. See that it's actually working. Now, one more. So we have 60 count in here. We added 10 in here. All is doing is this. Exactly what we have over here is doing exactly that. So again, if you're still confused, feel free to rewind the video and watch it again. But if you have a good idea what's going on, I want to give you a little bit of challenge. All right, so you can pause the video after this and then try to work it out, because I think it's really important for you to understand is you making some changes on the code. The more you interact with this code bases, the more you will understand it. So that's the approach I always do, and here I'm going to do that. If you made this so far, again, let's make a new challenge. So what the challenge is, right here we have an add 10, right? What if I want to withdraw? Like, say this is a bank account, you have $60 on a bank account, you're always adding 10, but what if I wanted to withdraw $10 off of it? Like, I want to have a button over here where I can withdraw money. You can call it remove 10. Instead of add 10, you can do remove 10. When I click on it, it's gonna minus 10 over here, and it will become 70. So that's the challenge for now. Go ahead, pause the video and make some changes. I'm gonna give you some hint. You need to make changes on here. You don't need to make any changes on here because this is just a store. You're not doing anything. You need to be making some changes on here, action and reducer. And you're gonna make some changes over here as well. So pause the video, try to implement it. Again, don't feel bad if you cannot work it out, if you cannot have a working solution. Don't feel bad. This is a learning opportunity. We're gonna come back and we're gonna implement that. But before that, go ahead and give yourself a try. If you can't make it, come back to this video, play it again, and we're gonna be following it up. So pause it right now, do it, and come back. So let's get started. So we are doing remove 10, right? First thing I'm going to do is work on the reducer because that's where everything happened, right? So I'm going to create a new case and call it remove 10. The reason why I'm going a capital letter because action is always, most of the time they have it in capitalized. So that's why I do it over here to kind of like differentiate from other functions and stuff. So again, I'm going to return the state, and then I'm going to update the count state.count minus 10. So instead of plus 10, we're doing a minus 10 over here. Great, awesome. Next, we're going to do is create an action to actually watch out for this. So export const, I will call it remove, and then I will have this right here. Type remove 10. And then there will be a payload of 0. Right? So that's there we go. We have a remove 10 over here, and then we have a reducer right here. And that's it. That's all we need to do. We go back to the app. We bring in the remove action that we created. And here we create a new button that kind of remove 10. Remove 10 from it. And then I'll type in remove. That's it. So we have a dispatch over here as well. Instead of doing that, we're doing the remove now here. And the action returning the type and the payload. And the type when it kind of like invoke on the reducer, it's kind of change the count to minus 10. So let's see it in action. So we have two buttons here. We add 50, 60, and then we take out 10, remove 10. So it's working great. So our Redux store is officially working awesome. And there you go. We have this in place. It's all working. And congratulations. You know a new subject called Redux, and you can like implement on the React application. Now, in this video, we went on a brief overview of how Redux works, but we haven't touched on the payload yet. So on the next video, I'm going to be covering over some, we're going to have a different example, and we're going to be doing some payload work. So stay tuned and make sure you check that out. But before that, I want to show you one last trick to actually master this and try to do this on your own. Try to create everything like this on your own. The concept is very simple. You have a store, you add 10, you remove 10. That way you have a really nice practice. The more you do this, like if you can do this every day you create a store like this and connect it with your React application, the more practice you have setting up Redux, and the better you will be mastering it. So when you join a company, when you work and they use Redux, you won't have any problem understanding it. So that way you kind of understand it. So practice makes it perfect. Again, if you like this tutorial, come back to the next one. We're going to cover a little bit more on the Redux payload, and then we're going to move on to Toolkit. So there's a couple of videos that need to be mentioned. But yeah, if you enjoyed this, like, comment, subscribe. Remember, this is a really small channel and nobody knows about it. So you guys liking this, commenting it, and subscribing, clicking on the notification really helped my small channel grow. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Bye.